My husband left his phone on the kitchen counter when he went to take a shower. I picked it up without thinking. The screen lit up with a text notification, and I assumed it was his brother asking about Thanksgiving plans again. It wasn't his brother. The message was from a contact saved as R. Caldwell, Westside account. Professional enough that I almost set the phone back down, but the preview showed 3 words before the notification collapsed. Last night was, I don't know why I unlocked it, 18 years of marriage and I'd never once looked through my husband's phone. I'd always believed that kind of checking was beneath both of us, that trust meant you didn't need to verify. I used to say that to my sister whenever she complained about her ex's secrecy. Trust is a choice you make every morning. I made a different choice that Tuesday. The full message read, "Last night was everything. You left your watch on my nightstand again. Same spot as last time. I've been staring at it all morning. Call me when she leaves for work." She. That was me. His wife of 18 years. The woman who'd made his coffee exactly how he liked it. 1 sugar, splash of oat milk, never cream. Was now just she. A scheduling variable. A departure time to work around. The shower was still running. I could hear him in there, doing that thing he does where he hums off key to whatever was stuck in his head that week. It had been "Don't Stop Me Now" for almost 2 months. I used to tease him about it at the dinner table. I set the phone back where I found it. I finished making breakfast. I smiled when he walked into the kitchen in his pressed Oxford shirt, the one I'd ironed the night before while he watched the game downstairs. "Morning," he said, kissing the top of my head like he'd done 1,000 mornings before. "Morning," I said back. Before we go any further, I want to say something to anyone watching this right now who's ever had that moment. That split second where the world rearranges itself and you're still standing in the same kitchen, holding the same spatula, but nothing is the same anymore. You are not alone. And if this story helps even one person trust their instincts, then it was worth telling. If you've ever felt unseen in your own life, please subscribe. It costs nothing, and these stories are for you. Now let me tell you what I found out next, because the affair was only the beginning. My name is Claire. I'm 41 years old. I teach 8th grade English at a public middle school in Columbus, Ohio, and for 18 years I believed I had a genuinely good marriage. My husband's name is Daniel. He's a senior financial advisor at a regional wealth management firm, the kind of place with a lot of glass walls and people who use the word portfolio in casual conversation. We met in grad school, both of us living off ramen and library coffee, arguing about Fitzgerald in a seminar that ran 40 minutes over every single week. He proposed on a Tuesday. Nothing special about the day, he just said he couldn't think of a single reason to wait any longer. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We built a life the careful, unglamorous way, paid off his student loans first because his interest rate was higher, bought a house in a neighborhood we could actually afford instead of the one we wanted, had the same argument about kitchen renovations for 6 years without ever starting them. Our friends called us the couple that made marriage look easy. I accepted that description without examining it too closely. The woman in that text message, R. Caldwell, I didn't know who she was. Not yet. I spent that first day in a fog that must have looked, from the outside, completely normal. I taught 2 periods of The Outsiders, ate half a granola bar at lunch, drove home on autopilot. Daniel texted me at 3 to say he had a late client meeting. I responded with a thumbs up emoji, the kind of automatic response that gets sent 100 times in an 18-year marriage without anyone thinking twice about it. That night, after he fell asleep, I lay very still in the dark and tried to count how many times in the past year he'd had a late client meeting. I stopped counting somewhere around 22. I didn't go through his phone again that night. I went to our shared laptop and opened the browser history. People who are conducting affairs are often remarkably careless about this. I think they convince themselves that a spouse who hasn't suspected anything after months or years simply doesn't have the capacity to look. The browser history was a map I hadn't known I needed. Hotel booking confirmations. A boutique in the Short North neighborhood I'd driven past 100 times but never entered. a jeweler's website with a ring I'd never seen on my finger, an Airbnb listing in Hocking Hills, romantic cabin getaway, Sleets 2 hot tub fireplace, with a check-in date that matched a weekend Daniel had told me was a mandatory team retreat in Cincinnati. I'd packed his bag for that trip. I'd included the wool socks he always forgot. I screenshot everything with the same methodical focus I use when I'm grading papers at midnight. Emotions, I decided, could come later. Right now, I needed information. The name Renata Caldwell appeared on one of the hotel confirmation emails, listed as the second guest. I searched the name. She appeared immediately. A LinkedIn profile, a headshot that looked like it cost more than my monthly car payment, and a title that made my stomach drop. Associate Wealth Manager, Daniel's firm. Not a client. A colleague. Someone who sat in those glass-walled offices 40 hours a week, who attended the same company events I'd been invited to as Daniel's wife, who had probably smiled at me at the firm's holiday party in December while I stood there in the dress I'd bought specifically because Daniel said it brought out my eyes. I closed the laptop. I went to the bathroom and ran cold water over my wrists the way my mother used to tell me to do when I was anxious as a kid. Then I went back to the kitchen and sat down at the table in the dark and thought about what kind of person I was going to be next. My sister called the following morning. Leigh is 4 years older than me, a labor and delivery nurse with zero patience for evasion, and she has always been able to tell when I'm not okay from the first syllable of my hello. "What happened?" she said. Not a question. I told her about the text. Not everything. I hadn't told anyone everything yet, but enough that by the time I finished, the silence on her end was the specific kind that means she's choosing her words very carefully. "How long do you think it's been going on?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "Long enough that he has a watch at her place. Long enough that she said same spot as last time." Leigh exhaled slowly. "Claire, you need to talk to someone who can help you figure out what you're dealing with before you say anything to him." She didn't mean a therapist, though she said that too. She meant someone who could help me understand the financial picture. Because Leigh had been through her own divorce 7 years earlier, and the thing she always said when other people's marriages fell apart was this: before you blow everything up, you need to know exactly what everything is worth. She was right. I just didn't know yet how right she was or how much I was about to find out. I spent the next 2 weeks learning things about my own marriage that I should have known and didn't. I'd always trusted Daniel with our finances completely. I'm a teacher. My salary is public information and it is not impressive. Daniel earned nearly 4 times what I made, and somewhere over the years the financial management of our life had migrated entirely to him. I paid for groceries and the occasional school supply run. He handled investments, retirement accounts, insurance, property taxes. I knew we were comfortable. I didn't know the specifics. I started with what I could access. Our joint checking account showed normal activity. Mortgage, utilities, my direct deposits, his. But the joint savings account I thought we'd been building together had a balance that was roughly $40,000 lower than I'd expected based on our last conversation about finances, which I now realized had been nearly 2 years ago. I couldn't access his individual accounts. I didn't have the passwords, but I found the paper statements in a folder in the filing cabinet in his office, and what they showed me was a slow, deliberate drain. Small transfers consistently to an account I didn't recognize, never large enough to flag, never random enough to be accidental. The account number led me nowhere on its own. But the memo lines on a few of the older statements said things like Caldwell Consulting and RC Management LLC. I sat on the floor of his office for a long time after I found that. This wasn't just an affair. This was money, our money, flowing toward her, toward them, toward whatever future they had been quietly constructing while I made his coffee and ironed his shirts and believed, genuinely believed, that we were building something together. I called Leigh that night and told her everything. She didn't say I told you so. She just said, "Okay, I know someone. His name is Victor. He's a forensic accountant, and he's going to help you understand exactly what you're looking at." Victor turned out to be a compact, unhurried man in his late 50s who had spent 30 years untangling exactly this kind of financial mess. He met me at a coffee shop near my school, ordered black coffee, and listened to everything I told him without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded once. "How much access do you have to joint accounts?" "Both names on the checking." "Both names on a savings account that's been quietly emptied." "Any property beyond the house?" I mentioned the cabin, the one in Hocking Hills I'd found in the browser history, the weekend retreat that had never involved me. Victor wrote something down. "Was that property ever discussed with you?" "Never." "Then we have somewhere to start," he said. What Victor found over the following weeks rewired my understanding of the last 3 years of my marriage. The property in Hocking Hills was deeded in Daniel's name only, purchased 18 months earlier with funds transferred from a retirement account he'd quietly rolled over and reclassified without my signature, which, Victor informed me with the flat affect of a man who'd seen too much, was not legal for a jointly held marital asset. Beyond the cabin, a brokerage account I'd never been told about. A life insurance policy that had been updated 12 months ago, removing me as primary beneficiary and replacing me with an entity called Caldwell Purse Holdings, an LLC, registered in Delaware with 2 members, my husband and the woman whose name appeared in his phone as a client account. They weren't just having an affair. They had been building a financial life together for years, funded partly by assets that were legally half mine, structured in ways designed to make those assets invisible and untraceable to a spouse who trusted completely. Victor laid out the documents in a row on the coffee shop table. "I've seen variations of this before," he said. "It's methodical. Whoever set this up understood enough about asset concealment to be dangerous." "He's a financial advisor," I said. Victor looked at me steadily. "I know." I drove to school the next morning and taught 2 periods of To Kill a Mockingbird. I explained to 26 8th graders why Atticus Finch believed the truth had to come out even when it was inconvenient. I did not cry until I got to my car at the end of the day. Then I called Lee and said, "I'm ready to end this, but I want to do it right." The right way, it turned out, required patience I wasn't sure I had. Lee's divorce lawyer, a woman named Frances who wore reading glasses on a chain and had the energy of someone who had heard every possible version of this story and found every version of it professionally motivating, told me very clearly during our first consultation, "Do not confront him yet. Do not let him know you know. Let the paper trail finish building itself." "He's still making transfers," Frances said, reviewing what Victor had documented. "If you confront him now, he stops. He hides things faster than we can find them. Your leverage disappears." So I lived inside my own marriage for another 3 weeks as a kind of undercover operative. I smiled across the dinner table. I asked about his workday. I attended his firm's spring networking event, stood in those glass-walled rooms and shook hands with people I didn't recognize. And some I did. Renata Caldwell was there. She was taller than I'd expected from the LinkedIn photo, early 30s in a cream blazer, holding a glass of white wine with the easy confidence of someone very comfortable in professional spaces. She introduced herself to me like we'd never overlapped before, her handshake firm, her smile practiced. "You must be Daniel's wife," she said. "He talks about you." "I'm sure he does," I said. I smiled back. I asked about her role at the firm with the interested tone I use with parents at school conferences. She told me about her work managing high-net-worth client portfolios. I mentioned that I taught middle school. She said, as people often do, that she could never have that kind of patience. I thought about what I knew was sitting in a Delaware LLC bearing part of her name. I said, "It's just a skill you develop." Later that night, Daniel told me I'd seemed really on at the event, that everyone liked me. I was just being myself, I said. He didn't hear anything in that. What I discovered in those final weeks came from a source I hadn't expected. One of Daniel's colleagues, a man named Paul who'd been at the firm for 12 years and clearly had complicated feelings about what he'd observed, reached out to Lee through a mutual friend. He didn't want to get involved. But he'd seen enough that staying silent felt wrong. He told Lee, and Lee told me, that the transfers I'd found were part of a larger pattern, that Renata had been involved in restructuring certain client accounts in ways that generated commissions that didn't fully appear on the firm's disclosed record, a grey area practice that the firm's compliance team had flagged twice in the past year without following through, that Daniel had been the authorizing advisor on all of it, and that at least 2 other clients had complained quietly about returns that didn't match what they'd been promised. This was no longer just about my marriage. I called Frances. She told me to call the Ohio Division of Securities. I did that too. The morning everything ended, I got up at 5:30, made coffee, and sat in the kitchen in the dark for an hour before Daniel came downstairs. I watched him go through our morning routine, the same choreography we'd performed 1,000 times. He looked like himself. He looked like a man without a single reason to be worried. I'd arranged, through Frances, for the securities investigator to make contact with the firm that afternoon. But before that happened, I needed Daniel to know something important, that I had known, that I had always been capable of knowing. That the 18 years of devoted wifehood he'd interpreted as credulity were, in fact, just trust, a different thing entirely, and not a character flaw. I set a folder on the kitchen table while he was pouring his coffee. He looked at it, then at me. "What's this?" "Sit down," I said. He sat. I didn't yell. I'd expected to want to. But what I actually felt, sitting across from him with my hands flat on the table, was something colder and more complete than anger. I was finished. I had been finished for some time, and this was just the conversation that made it official. I watched him go through the pages Victor had compiled. The color left his face in stages. First the accounts, then the cabin deed, then the LLC. "Claire, I'm not done," I said, and I laid down the last document, the securities complaint, already filed. The silence that followed lasted a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. The confidence that had lived in it for as long as I'd known him was gone. "You've been planning this?" "Yes," I said, "the same way you planned everything else. Except I did it legally." He tried several things after that. He tried explaining. He tried suggesting it was complicated, that there were things I didn't understand about how the financial structures worked, that what looked like misconduct was actually standard industry practice. He tried, briefly and disastrously, suggesting that the state of our marriage had contributed to his choices. I let him finish. Then I said, "My lawyer will be in touch. I've moved what belongs to me into an account you don't have access to. The house filing goes through Frances's office. I'd suggest you talk to someone before 3 o'clock today." I picked up my school bag and my travel mug and I left my own house without looking back. I taught The Great Gatsby that afternoon, first period. We were at the chapter where Nick says you can't repeat the past, and Gatsby refuses to believe it. My students wanted to debate whether Gatsby was delusional or just hopeful. I let the conversation run 12 minutes over. At 2:47, my phone buzzed with a text from Frances. "Securities investigators are at the firm. Daniel's been asked to stay for a meeting. It's starting." I read it in my car in the school parking lot. I sat there for a moment, watching the buses pull out, listening to the sound of kids yelling to each other across the lot, the ordinary, unstoppable noise of a Tuesday afternoon in Ohio. Then I drove home. The legal process was not quick or clean or satisfying in the way revenge looks on television. The securities investigation took 9 months. The divorce took 14. Frances was meticulous and relentless in a way that occasionally exhausted me and consistently made me grateful. The marital assets that had been quietly moved into structures bearing Renata's name were not, in the end, as invisible as Daniel had believed. Victor's documentation held up. The cabin was included in the marital estate. The retirement account rollover was deemed a breach of fiduciary duty within the marriage, a phrase I had to look up and then read 3 more times before I believed it was real. Daniel's firm terminated his employment within 6 weeks of the investigation opening. His license is currently under review by the state. Renata resigned before she was asked to leave. The clients who had complained quietly were offered settlements. The two of them are, as far as I know, still together, which Lee says makes sense because they've both lost everything else. What about me? I got the house. I chose to sell it. I am currently renting half of a duplex near a park I actually like, with a porch big enough for a table and 2 chairs, which is exactly as much outdoor furniture as I need right now. I have my full retirement account back, plus what the court determined was my share of the assets that had been moved without my consent. I'm not wealthy, I'm stable, which is better. What nobody tells you about this kind of ending, the kind where you do everything right, where you build the evidence and you file the papers and you stand in the courtroom and you win, is that winning doesn't feel like you think it will. I spent a long time afterward expecting to feel lighter. I'd heard people say that leaving a bad situation feels like putting down a weight you didn't know you were carrying. What it actually felt like was quiet. A very large, very specific quiet that settled in and didn't go away. My sister says I'm harder now. She says it like a warning and a compliment at the same time. She's not wrong. I check things I used to take on faith. I ask questions that would have felt rude to me 3 years ago. I have a different relationship with the word trust than I used to. It's not gone, but it lives differently in me now. More deliberately, less automatically. I'm still teaching. 8th grade, still. My students are loud and exhausting, and occasionally brilliant, and showing up for them every day has been, without question, the thing that kept me most tethered to myself during all of it. Lee got me a plant for my new porch. A fern. It keeps trying to die, and I keep keeping it alive. And I think that's probably a metaphor for something, though I'm not sure what. Last Thursday evening, my school phone rang from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer it. I'd been careful about that since the proceedings started, but something made me pick up. A voice I didn't recognize. Polite, neutral, careful. Ms. Peirce? This is a colleague of Daniel's. He's been asking about you. He told me to let you know he's been thinking about the future. About what comes after. I held the phone for a moment. Then I said, very calmly, please tell him I said the same thing. I hung up and stood in my classroom after hours, the whiteboard still showing the day's vocabulary words. The chairs pushed in crooked, the way 8th graders always leave them. Outside, the parking lot was empty. The building was quiet. I thought about the woman standing in her kitchen 18 months ago, holding her husband's phone, reading a stranger's words, and deciding in the space of a few seconds to stop pretending she hadn't seen what she'd seen. That woman had no idea what she was walking into. She had no idea what she was capable of. I'm glad she picked up the phone. I'm glad she kept going. If any part of this story felt like yours, you already know what to do. You've known for a while. Trust that. Hit the like button if you've ever chosen yourself when everything in you wanted to keep the peace instead. Drop a comment telling me what part of this story stayed with you. And don't miss the next one, because Claire's story isn't over yet. I've thought a lot about the moment I unlocked that laptop. It was such a small thing. I needed to print a field trip permission slip for one of my students. That was it. That was the whole reason I sat down at that desk. And I think about what would have happened if I'd just printed the page and walked away. If I hadn't noticed the browser tab still open. If I hadn't looked. Some people say ignorance is protection. I used to half believe that. I don't anymore. What I understand now, and I mean really understand, not just as something you say, is that reality doesn't change based on whether you're looking at it. Daniel had already moved the money. Renata's name was already on that policy. The cabin already existed. All of it was already true whether I knew about it or not. The only thing that changed when I opened that folder was that I finally had the information I needed to protect myself. That's not a small thing. That's everything. I used to think that trusting someone completely was the highest form of love. I think differently now. I think real love. The kind that's actually sustainable and actually honest requires two people who both choose transparency, not just one person who chooses blind faith while the other person takes advantage of it. What Daniel and I had toward the end wasn't intimacy. It was one person's trust being used as a tool by someone who understood exactly how far that trust extended and stayed carefully inside it. That's not love, that's strategy. What took me longest to forgive myself for wasn't staying. It was the self-doubt that came after. The weeks I spent wondering if I'd somehow missed a signal, if I should have asked more questions years earlier, if the version of me who handed all the financial responsibility to someone else was naive in a way that made what happened partly my fault. I want to say this clearly for anyone who's ever gone down that road. Trusting your partner with your shared finances is not a character flaw. Building a life with someone who turns out to have been lying is not a failure of intelligence. Daniel made choices, Renata made choices. I made the choice to believe the people I committed my life to. Those are not equivalent. The part of this I'm most proud of, more than any courtroom outcome, more than the asset recovery, more than the new apartment or the new chapter, is that I didn't fall apart, not because I'm unusually strong, but because I made a decision, early on, to stay focused on what I could actually do rather than spiraling over what I couldn't change. Victor, Francis, Lee. The paper trail. One documented step at a time. That's not drama. That's work. Quiet, exhausting, unglamorous work that nobody sees until it's done. If you're somewhere in the middle of something like this right now, I want you to hear this. The clarity comes. It doesn't come all at once, and it doesn't come painlessly, but it comes. And the version of you on the other side of it, the one who made the calls, found the documents, asked the hard questions, and didn't look away, that person is going to surprise you. I surprised myself. That's the part nobody warned me about. Not just that I'd get through it, but that I'd find out who I actually was when everything I'd built my identity around was taken away. Turns out I'm someone who keeps a fern alive on her porch, who teaches 8th graders about moral courage in literature while quietly practicing it in her own life, who picks up the phone even when she doesn't recognize the number. That's enough. That's more than enough.